Welcome to another episode of Mid-Atlantic Garden Hack. My name is Joel. Let's go see what we've got in the garden today. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to grow red potatoes in little bushel buckets just like the ones we have right here. If you want to grow potatoes, it might seem like it's a difficult thing to do, but the truth is, if you're patient and you have the right materials, it's not difficult to grow at all. And even though we're in the middle of January and the temperature outside is really cold, the garage doesn't get cold enough to kill the potatoes, and you can actually begin getting a harvest before we even get into the spring months. Let me show you how to get started. First of all, what you're going to need is one of these buckets right here. I believe that this bucket is about a full bushel. You could get something that's a little bigger than that if you're interested, but the reason we're using these is because they're big enough that we can move them in and out as the temperature begins to warm up in the spring. That way they can start getting natural light. One of the things that we do here in the garage is we do have a little bit of natural light because of these windows, but it's really not enough to sustain growth. So one of the things that I've done is I've gotten one of these grow lights that I use during the day just to make sure that we get enough light here in the garage for these plants. Now let's go back to our bushel bucket. One of the things that you want to do is you want to fill this bucket with some soil that's really soft, it drains well, and it's full of nutrients. Now, you don't want the soil to be too alkaline because potatoes like soil that's not too alkaline. So this soil that we have here is actually composted leaves from a wooded area that we've been collecting, and we've filled this up. The first thing you need to do is you fill up your bucket with your compost material, and you don't want to fill it up all the way because one of the things that you want to do is you want to add soil to it as the plants begin to mature and as they begin to develop their root system. Now what we're going to use for our to get our plant started is we're going to use some of these potatoes right here. This is just a regular bag that you get at the grocery store. When you get them at the grocery store, they're potatoes you can use to eat, and you can still eat these potatoes. But as these sit in the dark for a period of time and they're not used, what happens is they begin to develop these little growths on the side, and those little growths are actually new plants. If you look real closely at this, you can see that there's even a little bit of root growth that's starting to develop here. And so rather than knocking these off and washing it and eating it, we're going to keep these and we're going to actually introduce them to the soil. And as the moisture starts to get around it, then it's going to begin to grow a little bit, kind of like this one. And once we put it in the soil, after a few days, you'll start to see a pretty good number of roots starting to develop, and that small plant will start to grow. Let me show you really the way that these will begin to grow. Here's some red potatoes that I've introduced, and these have been here for a couple of weeks. If you look at this potato right here, you could see the new plant that's beginning to develop, and look at that root system right there. What's going to happen is as those roots dig down into this soil, they're going to begin to develop new potatoes, and as that plant matures, it's going to go through its life cycle, and then you're going to have a lot of potatoes here in this dirt. Look at this one right here. This one's a little bit further along as well. I like using red potatoes because they seem to grow a little bit faster. I would say by the end of 2.5 months, getting into 3 months, you really could start harvesting your potatoes. Last summer, we actually harvested probably 3 or 4 different crops of them because we started them at this time of the year. You can also use other potatoes like your typical potatoes that you'd use if you're making French fries or baked potatoes. Here's an example of one right here. But like I said, after a couple of weeks, you're going to get these plants developing right here. Another thing that you can do, you don't have to do it, but sometimes it's helpful, is you can take this potato right here and you can divide it into pieces so that you separate these plants out. And if you do that, you're not going to harm the plants. They're pretty hardy, and they can begin to develop independent of one another, and you can get a really good harvest from these right here. As we go through our growing season, I'll give you updates every couple of weeks. And once we get to the point where we're ready to consider harvesting, I think you'll enjoy seeing how many potatoes we can get just out of this one little bushel bucket. And really, it doesn't cost us anything. It's just some old potatoes that we were thinking about throwing away. We can take them and use them, and we can have a nearly endless supply of potatoes throughout the year.